The strength of a nation's currency is based on the strength of that nation's economy. And the American economy is by far the strongest in the world.
The dollar came to dominate trade after World War II. The U.S. was the biggest economy in the world. Other countries were trying to rebuild, and the dollar, it was stable and plentiful.
The U.S. dollar dominates global trade. In 2019, some 88% of international transactions involved U.S. dollars.
More than $1.8 trillion of U.S. currency is now in circulation around the world, and it's believed that 2/3 of $100 bills and nearly half of $50 bills are held outside the U.S.
The US dollar has become the world's reserve currency. So how exactly did this become so powerful?
Hello everybody, the US dollar is by far. This is the one of the most influential currency in the world, and every country depends on the US dollar. Whether they buy oil and any goods from the other countries, that each country needs US dollar to trade each other, because US dollar is one of the trusted currencies in the world, and every country just trusts the US dollar rather than any other their own currencies. So every time the countries buys oils and company trade their goods, and investors move money across the borders, and also the government pay the debt. But here is strange part, that most of the transactions only happen in US dollar, and that's give the US dollar unprecedented power to control the world economy, and it can also use the sanctions, that it can isolate any countries from the sanctions. And this is the US dollar unprecedented power for the US economy. So this begs the question that how did the US dollar became so powerful that every country depends on the US dollar, and what are the strategies that the President of the United States deployed to make the United States dollar is one of the greatest currencies ever. To understand why the US dollar became most powerful currency in the world, we first have to go back in the time that the US looks different. Before the 7th century, the European powers was controlling the global trades, and the European empire was the prominent for trading the world rights, all the goods, and it's moving across all over the world since all the trade, and it was dominated all the money denominations and everything. Most of the majority things that's dominated by the European empire. And at the time, the currency wasn't really prevalent, but that time the gold was the prominent, and the gold was the commodity that they used to trade with each other currencies, and it was the rules of the European empire at that time. In the United States wasn't the independent nation at that time. The United States was imperialized by the European powers, and the European countries was colonized the United States at the time. And even after the 18th century, when it was independent nations, the United States was independent, but it's politically, but not the trade actually, because the United States wasn't really independent from the trade, and it didn't have any things to feed their citizens. So it has only one thing, that is the agriculture, and entire citizens that depends on the agriculture, and they are just focusing on the survivalism. So the United States was creating the rules and creating the extraordinary strategy for making its greatest assist for the trade. And in that time, the United States had the prime industries, it's agriculture industries. So people were relying on this agriculture, and they export more this agriculture goods. But this agriculture goods that's barely survived their economy, and they ran on book credit, meaning most of the European merchants credit their economy and credits lots of goods to their economy, the supposing of future payment. And the United States has over 1 billion plus of debt, and it was one of the debt nations, and the United States was already vanishing, and the United States needed something constructive that it's control the entire its economy and occupy their all the poverty from this economy. But until early 20th century, the United States still had the 1 billion of debt, and it was one of the prominent debtor nations. But in the meantime, the United States was building in, it was industrializing its economy. The majority of European nations that started investing in the United States, and they had the most of the stock, and they had the most of the investment in the United States. So they have literally controlling the whole trade and whole industries in the United States at that time. The United States is building and industrializing its economy by the European power. But during the World War I and World II, all the European nations and European empires just busy at fighting in the wars. And all of the European factories were shot down and the workers also went to battle. In this battle, when the workers went to battle, they couldn't produce any goods and they couldn't export more goods to other countries. And it was become the dependent nation. So someone feed something to this country and this country survived. And this is the same system that's happened. And the United States had this great research because it was already starting its mobilizing and also industrializing its economy, and they could literally started influencing this strategy. So they used this strategy to influence the European empires. Since the European empire was so wealthy, and before that the European empire so greatest that they literally wanted to become the credit nations, and they have the greatest strategy that they implement, and they ship and they export more and more and tremendous amounts of goods to the Europe. It is the military equipment and food and most of the other necessary things that the battle was just ongoing, and they were literally buying this everything. So before we know that, the European empire has the credit to the United States, and the United States was a dependent nation and it was a debtor, and the European empire had the lots of assets in the United States, and they were also selling this assets and they were also selling this investment to the United States. So United States could just keep this investment themselves, and it was became the independent nation from the state. But when the financial assets was no longer enough, the Europe started shipping its gold to the United States. And the United States was before the debtor nations, and it was become the creditor nations. So it had over 1 billion plus of debt before, but after the war ended, it had over 10 billion plus of credit to the European empires, and it was became the Europeans' biggest credit ever in after just World War I and World II. And in terms of the United States gold, by the end of the war, the United States holds over 75% of the world's monetary gold reserve in the world. Okay, now let's talk about the gold. Before the World War I, the gold was the prominent, and it is used for the international trades, and the country was trust on it. And in the time, the gold was tied to the gold standard, meaning country have a fixed amount to the gold. It's only the $20 is to 1 ounce of gold. So people trust gold more than the currency. And also, the country could print money as many as the value of their gold reserve have. And that was the prime action of the gold before. And after the World War II, since the United States has over 75% of the world gold monetary reserve, so that leads the United States create the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. And in this agreement, the US dollar is only one currency that has fixed price that can pay to the gold. The $35 is equals to per ounce of gold. And if you need 1 ounce of gold, you need $35 to pay to this gold. And since then, the United States dollar was trusted currency, and it became more trusted currency than the Britain currency. And that the US dollar provides the ripple effect for the global trade. And that is the gold standard. And within just decades, this system was created represented the United States dollar, and it was so stable that the dozens of new countries were included also in the system. But from the 1955, the US engaged in the South Vietnamese War to help the South Vietnam to providing military support, and as well as the United States spends more money in the military, and it spends and imports more goods from the other nation, and that leads the trade deficit in the United States, and the United States currency was fluctuated, and the United States currency was in place stabilized. And by the time of 1971, the investor and other participating nations lose confidence, and they started converting dollar into the gold, and that's on the US gold reserve. And for stabilizing this dollar, in 15 August 1971, the US President Nixon shocked the world that the world is no longer could convert the dollar into the gold. And the Nixon suspends its gold convertibility of the dollar.
I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets, except in amounts and conditions determined to be in the interest of monetary stability and in the best interest of the United States.
And after the Nixon shock, the US dollar was no longer redeemable gold by the foreign central bank. However, the US dollar was still the world reserve currency due to its strength, and because the currency value was based on the market demand and supply, like the same system today we have. If more demand of this currency, it means the more value this currency has. If no demand of this currency, it means this doesn't have any demand in its value. It is the same system as today we have. And even after the gold standard collapse in 1971, so the United States dollar was a prominent for the global trade. So United States was concerned about reducing and depreciating its value and from the global market, and it needed a way to keep the US dollar in the global demand. So it needed some strategy, and it found Saudi Arabia. This is the major supplier of oil at the time. So the Saudi Arabia is the major supplier of the oil today, and the Saudi Arabia made a strategy with the United States, that is the petrodollar system. So in this petrodollar system happened in 1973, that petrodollar system gives the United States huge leverage. It means the Saudi Arabia only sells their oil only in dollar. It doesn't sell oil in other currency. It means, so if every country wants to buy oil, they need first dollar to buy the oil, and that keeps the dollar value increasing over time. And to respond to Saudi Arabia, United States provide the supports, military supports, and also financial support in most of the years. And that's when it's that the Saudi Arabia was very desperate to needed something, and the United States provide that all the support to the Saudi Arabia. And that was the deal between the United States and Saudi Arabia. Okay, let's understand how this petrodollar system actually works. We need to understand the three factors to understand the total petrodollar. The first is the US dollar, and second is the oil, and third is the US assets and investment from the Saudi Arabia. So in this system, the first we should go into the oil. The oil like oil and US dollar, so this is dependent, like this is interconnected. For example, if you wanna buy oil, like every country, like wherever you are from, right? So if you wanna buy oil, your country and your country's central bank must hold the US dollar to buy the oil from the Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is a major, like it is one of the main country that produce most of oil. So everyone following the same system. So if you wanna buy oils, you need to have the US dollar in your reserve. In this way, the US dollar demand is skyrocketing, and so everyone's buying oil, the US dollar demand is just keep increasing and increasing over time. And the second is when the Saudi Arabia gives that dollar, the Saudi Arabia spend this dollar in the US assets like treasury bond or other US assets like stock market and so many other things. Saudi Arabia invest in this money into the US economy, and that ensures that the economy still keep running. And it is a recycling methods called the petrodollar recycling, that all the money goes back to the United States. And this system leads a tremendous advantage for every other oil producer nations. For example, the Saudi Arabia, UAE, Qatar, and other like Venezuela and other nations. So, and they wanted the same system because everyone holding a reserve in a US dollar, because it's happening, it's everywhere. Like US dollar needs everyone, and avoid that ambiguity and make it streamline every trade in the oil supply. They made a strategy. In 1974, OPEC nation, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, they participate in the system. And all others oil producing nations, they also involved in the system, and the system was running the world at the time. And system was still running the world today in this system. Like it is creating a ripple effect all over the world today, and everyone is not avoiding the US dollar because the US dollar is still prominent for the all over the world, and 85% of the worldwide trade is still the oil markets, and that's happening in the US dollar. So the question we can hear is, why these OPEC nations that joined in this system, and what are the benefits that the OPEC nation get? So there is a primary benefit, that is getting rid of all the ambiguity and selling more oil for the worldwide, because their oil is increase the demand, and they want to just get rid of all the ambiguity and all the unstable currency. So these OPEC nations are signed, because if they sell oil only in dollar, they are selling oil in stable currency. Just the dollar was the world reserve currency, and which would bring the more demand than before. So just understand their benefits in just one sentence, and that is demand for the oil more in just stable currency. They wanted to create a stable currency and they wanted to have the more demand. That is, this solved the problem by this OPC nation and also the US dollar and this petrodollar system. And that is the huge leverage and that is a huge advantage for this OPEC nations, and they just participated. And this system gives the immense power for this OPEC nation, and that's where the demand for oil is more increasing and also demand for the US dollar. And since then, the US currency, it's controlling the world trade, just playing the role as world reserve currency, and that gives the US colossal advantage. And they also use a sanction and they can make isolated any country, and also the influencing world for providing the steady bonds to invest. And today, every time the US economy is going to collapse, the world would back to the US and bring it back to the same positions. And in this concept, it's also works in like printing money. If you talk about the printing money, so if any country print excessive amounts of money, when they print too much money, that country is likely to collapse. But if the United States prints too much money, so it doesn't, like the world would back the United States and the world would need the US dollar. So more US dollar means more demand. And so if US dollar is more, the goods become cheaper in worldwide, and it gives US dollars its very advantage. And that is the huge leverage today the United States dollar is playing to dominate in this multiple world today, that the United States is controlling the 85% of the world trades. But even today, there is still 15% of the trades that's controlled by the other nations, especially the China, Yuan, and the European Unions that are trying to de-dollarize the United States currency. And this is the reality of the United States. The United States controlling the world. It's not because the United States has a more GDP and it's a prosperous country. So it is a prosperous country, but it is not actually the prosperous country itself. So we made this prosperous in this country. Like we back this country in every incident. So we are just making the United States it's greater and more better and more better. And the United States funding that's all of the money and funding and leveraging this money into its economy to build its economy and make it prosperous. And guys, if you like this video, just hit the subscribe button and share this video as many people as you can. And for the next video, just take care and bye bye.